So before we kind of get into the meat of everything, so before we start to get into the meat of everything, I just want you to introduce yourself. What's your name? What do you do? All of that.
All right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here and talk about my art with you today. My name is Carol Brady, and I have an art business that I've been growing over the past 5 years. It's simple, it's just my name, Carol Brady Art. I mostly work on canvas with acrylic and mostly market and show my work on Instagram. So it's been kind of a nice organic growth over the last few years, and I've really enjoyed my craft and sharing it with people.
Nice. Do you do most of your markets here in Columbia, or do you kind of go explore outside of South Carolina?
You know, I actually am going to start showing at markets next month. So I've only sold online through my website and Instagram, like, so far.
Nice.
I've had a couple little pop-ups, but nothing, haven't really put myself out there in that way yet, mostly just been on social media, which is kind of weird to consider.
Yeah, for sure. Because when I think of art, I kind of think of the especially studio art, like the tangible, and there might be like some skepticism around like buying something on
that you haven't seen,
versus seeing it. Do you have a hard time like packaging? How do you send somebody something so like valuable and fragile?
That's a really great question. So a lot of my pieces are really big. Like my favorite size is 30 by 40, you know, so we're talking like this. So I've learned how to ship those well and package them where they get to you without breaking. But the new thing is drop ship through, you know, an external service. So I've been building up my print business recently and getting high quality scans of my art so that I can replicate it on canvas through, you know, a print process, and then they actually will ship it for me. So that's the next step, because shipping is a huge piece. You know, when you are an artist, you want to make art all the time, but you actually end up working on your business like 80% of the time, and you only have a little bit of time left for art. It's such a weird phenomenon.
Definitely. I noticed that too, and I talk to artists in the music space about that all the time. It's like, there's some of the shit that has nothing to do with music that you work on constantly, you know? What makes you want to choose acrylic over oil or watercolor? So I've really identified as an artist for most of my life, but my medium has changed many times. So when I was a little kid, it was music. I wanted to sing. I would record my favorite songs off the radio on cassette tapes, like as they came, and then stop them and wait for my next favorite song to come and like practice singing. I really identified with that. And then as I was getting into middle school and high school, it was band, and I played the clarinet, and then that was like my whole artist identity was like, I'm this type of musician. And then in high school, it was band and theater, and in college, it was marching band. I mean, I've always just had like a different way of trying to express myself. And with getting to acrylic on canvas was actually kind of random, because I had been playing around with watercolors for a while, like, you know, true watercolor on paper, but it just didn't feel like big enough. And watercolor, it like, you know, it's kind of like a thinner process. Like it's not as bold. It's hard to make that bold. And then I took a class like on YouTube. Like I found this artist that was teaching how to do that same watercolor style, but with acrylic, because you can make the bolder colors, but you can still get that like kind of flowing visual from the paint. So I just started playing around with it. At first, it was just really not great. Like I was like, what is this? How are they doing that? So I had to really study it for maybe about 6 months. We were living in New Orleans at the time, and New Orleans is like one of the most creative cities that I've ever experienced. And so I was just getting inspiration from everywhere. And I basically took the whole front of our house and turned it into my studio. I had a toddler at the time, and he had to learn how to like walk around my paint, because I would have canvases like drying all over the house, because I would just, when I pick up a new art medium, I kind of like obsess over it, to where it's like all I can think about, all I want to do. And it really helped transform me like out of that early parenting haze that I think a lot of people experience when they first become parents. You really lose your identity in it, because your child is so fragile and small, and they take up all of your creative energy. They take up all your mental space. So acrylic and canvas
kind of gave me something back in myself that I had really lost.
Yeah.
And it's a creative outlet that I haven't let go of yet. So I've been, pretty much that's been my main medium for the last 5 years.
That's awesome. Talk to me a little bit more about New Orleans and some of the creative things you experienced and maybe how you felt being a creative in a space that's really creative.
That's I love to go back and reminisce, so I appreciate the question because I love talking about New Orleans. So I moved there, so my wife and my baby and I moved there. He was 8 or 9 months old, and it was July of the pandemic. So, the pandemic started around March, so it was just a couple months in. Yeah. So the first year, the city was pretty much shut down. And so all we could really do was walk around, because everyone was kind of scared still to like go inside, restaurants, bars. Their music scene was really paused. There was no Mardi Gras that first year. But the city is alive. Like, the buildings are alive, the streets are alive. Like, you just walk down any street in New Orleans and you're literally watching history like unfold. Just the multiculturalism of the city, like the way that people are just drawn to it and they stay and they just saturate the city with like their joy and their creation, their passion. There's a lot of authors there. There's a lot of visual artists, musical artists. Like, it's so rich. So even though the city had paused, like I was still getting like just these vibrations almost from the city. And I was like, I have to put myself into the scene too. And so it took a little bit of, build up, but I did release my first art series in New Orleans, and it was called Under the Trees. And in New Orleans, there's live oaks everywhere. And because it's so wet in the soil, the way they grow, it just looks different because they're constantly getting flooded. So they grow like these really like spindly, like long branches, and they all kind of twist into each other. And when you're walking down certain streets, it's a canopy over you. And so I found myself constantly under the trees, with my little kid who was learning how to walk. And so my first series has a lot of like just watercolor flows of like colors kind of coming into each other to basically try to capture that feeling of being encapsulated by this beauty and this creation. And so that was, my first kind of putting it out there. And I got a nice response, initially from friends and family, but also from like my neighbors and people in New Orleans who like follow the art scene. And it kind of gave me the confidence to like replicate that and do it again. So I released 3 art series in New Orleans, and I was able to photograph a lot of them. And so a lot of those pieces will be, when I do my print release next month, some of those pieces back from the very first series will be reflected there. And I just feel so lucky that I was in New Orleans. We were only there for 2 years, but it really changed my life. Just being around so many people who are confident in expressing themselves creatively, because a lot of people don't have the courage to do that. And I think that we're all artists in some way. We all have this inner world that we want to be seen by others. And some people get that from a lover or a best friend or a parent. And some people get that from putting their art into the world.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that's always been something I've needed as a person. So it's been really cool to have like a physical medium to share with people.
Yeah. And then being in such a creative space, like you said, that probably inspired you or was that catalyst to kind of, get out of your comfort zone. What do you notice are some kind of comparisons and contrasts with being in New Orleans versus Columbia?
It's a very different city. My wife grew up here, so she's from Columbia. She went to AC Flora. We know a lot of people in the city. Her family's here, and so it really, in some ways, it really felt like a coming home, even though it was a new city for me to live in. I felt really embraced by the city, by artists and creatives. I initially got involved with FemX and like that community of that co-working space, and I had my first art exhibition there in Columbia and got a nice response. So I've really felt welcomed here, and there's so much beauty in Columbia too. I was also pregnant when we moved here, so And my second child is 1.5 now. So I'm really just kind of coming out of that haze again. You know, when I moved here, I was pregnant. Everybody knew me as like the new artist who's pregnant. You know, I was like out to here doing my first art show. And so I really feel like I'm just now really stepping out there and getting the confidence again to be like, okay, I want to really announce myself as an artist, which is why I want to start showing at Soda City Market and like doing more pop-ups around the city, because I'm kind of getting that same confidence back that I had when I released Under the Trees. It's almost like I went down underground again, and now I feel like I'm
for sure
in, you know, on the other side of that again.
And even that's just kind of symbolic of and there's a correlation between that and some of your work too, because a lot of it kind of encapsulates life and the circle of life and yeah, that's an awesome kind of connection to make. You mentioned in your summary that a lot of your subject matter and things that you put into your art deals with being a mother and motherhood, right? But also how sometimes all the responsibilities of being a mother can take away from that expression. So how do you battle both expressing motherhood in your art, but also actually being a mother, possibly taking time away from that?
That's a yeah, I know. I'm like laughing because I'm like, it's so comical because it's so true. I don't think there's any way to not lose yourself in raising another person, because the responsibility is just as dense as anything can be. And you know, I think we're all trying to do it better than it was done for us, even though I deeply respect and appreciate my parents. And I now know the sacrifices they had to make for me. And I do believe that most people are doing the best that they can when they raise their children. So you want to do the same. And yeah, it completely takes up all of your mental, physical, emotional space. But that like yearning to do something that's all your own, that's been so powerful for me. And that's been the motivator of like, I have to, you know, the housework and the childcare, like you have to pause it and make time for yourself, or you truly lose your soul. I know that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I've invested most of the money that I've made from art, I've actually just used it to buy childcare, so then I can make more art. Which is funny because, but that's the season of life I'm in right now. So even when my daughter was a baby, she wasn't in daycare yet, like I would just get this feeling like I need to make a piece of art. And so I'm like, okay, I got to find a sitter and just, you know, spend the money on the sitter and making the art. But it's like, that's how important it is, you know, for me. And I think a lot of my followers on Instagram, like they'll message me and they'll say, I don't understand how you're doing all of this. And I'll say, well, I'm not doing all of this, right? I'm outsourcing. For sure. I'm using the art to fund making the art. You know, and I think a lot of artists are in that space where we're not doing it for money or fame. We're doing it to express what's inside of us, to hope that it inspires others. And I think that's what my art does, because even some of my closest friends will say, you know, oh my gosh, I love your latest piece. Like, I need to make something creative this weekend. And I'm like, do it. You know, make it happen, because that is something that no one can take away from you. And this world will beat you down and it will take everything from you, but it can't take your creation, you know? For sure. And so it's just, it's more than a hobby for me, you know, it is me. My art is who I am.
And that's huge, because there's almost maybe even some guilt whenever you're a parent or you have something as big of a responsibility as that to claim some of your time. That's one aspect of the many things that you are, you know, so I think that's inspiring and super helpful for other people that may be kind of at qualms of like, hey, I'm a mother, but I kind of want to do this. But if I pursue this, I feel guilty because I should be a mother 100% of the time. You know what I mean? That's a huge thing that you are, but you're also all these other things, and you deserve to allocate time to those things. So that's huge. That's huge that you are able to say that and people are able to hear that. And
yeah, it's controversial, right? Because like, the visual of like the sacrificial mother who gave it all, you know, you just look at the Mother's Day advertisements, people are like, your mom gave it all for you. And it's like, that is so dead to me. Like, that is not how I want to be remembered by my children. Right. I want them to feel loved and cared for by me, of course, and I want them to see these other parts of me, because they're going to grow up and they're going to move away and they're going to have their own lives. And is my identity going to be stuck in the parenting of them, or am I going to continue moving my identity forward? And I really just desperately want to have expression that they can look back on, and that can be a model for them to do the same, because you never know what kind of mark you can leave on the world. And I think a lot of children, like, they don't see their parents living out their own passions because it's so hard to do it. And so I'm constantly fighting against that and trying to show my almost 5-year-old and 1.5-year-old, you know, they'll say, oh, mama's an artist. You know, it's like, I actually have a full-time job that is not being an artist, but like, they don't even identify with that, because they're like, oh, my mom is an artist. You know, they see the paintings everywhere, and they want to do it too. And sometimes they mess up my artwork and I have to redo it because, like, they get their footprints on there, or like they'll smear something and I'm like, and then somehow it always works out, you know? So they're very much a part of it with me.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, once again, just one of the many creations that you made.
Yeah, there's certainly art pieces that I made as well.
But yeah, eventually though, and I'm sure they have those questions now, but as they get older, like, they'll want to know more about you and who you are, and what you did before them, what you did after them, and this, that, and the third. And so it's important to have answers to those questions, rather than like,
definitely.
I don't know who I am outside of you.
Yeah.
You know, that's huge. When you were speaking on acrylic and mixing that with watercolor and the kind of process to master that medium, because art's an umbrella term, studio art's an umbrella term, and there's all these kind of subcategories, and there's things you're good at, things that you aren't good at. A lot of times we don't really spend as much time talking about, like, hey, when I first did this, it was really bad.
Let's talk about that.
Like just anybody doing it, right? So talk to me a little bit about how you stayed motivated when you first blended acrylic and watercolor and it didn't look good, versus now it looks great.
I love that you're an artist, so you know that process yourself, I'm sure. But I think because I've changed mediums and, you know, art expression so many times, I know that there's going to be that period of it's not great, you know, because I've done that with singing and like learning an instrument and, you know, acting. And of course these are all things I did in school, but they're still experiences that I have that I can look back and say, okay, it's not what I want it to be now. It's not conveying the emotion or the feeling I want yet. Right. You know, and having that confidence in yourself and betting on yourself that you can improve over time, that's something that I guess I'm lucky to have, because I know a lot of people will try something and they're like, oh, I'm just not good at that. And it's like, well, how badly did you want to be good at it? Right. Because nobody, like, people say, oh, they have natural born talent for X. Okay, maybe, but there's still a craft that you have to perfect, and you have to be motivated by the art enough to push through being bad at it. And what does bad even mean? I think what I mean when I say that is it's not conveying what you want it to convey.
For sure. There's a disconnect between what you're trying to make and what happened when it came out on paper. Yeah, like, what I struggled with was making art look soft. Yeah. Because acrylic is basically plastic, right? So it's not soft. And when you're blending it with water, that's not a normal art process. And so I had to learn, like, just through trial and error, like, how to really blend it, and like the timing of when it's saturated just right. And the visual consistency of knowing, okay, this is gonna pour smooth. And then being willing to scrap the whole canvas and try again without getting discouraged by that, because that's part of the process. And especially with commissions, people that will commission a piece from me, they have in their mind what they want it to look like. And then I have on the canvas, like, what I thought they meant. We'll go back and forth. I'll paint a commission 2 or 3 times for someone, because we're trying to get our creative visions to match. And part of that is about getting the medium to do what you want it to do. And so I think you just have to be open to failing, because you're not going to like every piece you make. And other people aren't going to like every piece you make, but that's not the point. The point is to try to get what's inside of you out and externalized.
And that's I keep saying that, but that's because that's really what it is. Yeah. That's the whole thing.
For sure. Tell me a bit about some of your other series and what inspired them.
Okay. So I did another series called State of Mind, and I only used blue paint. And because I have that watercolor style, it evokes a lot of like imagery of like ocean, like tropical waters. I did like some darker pieces, some like brighter pieces. And one of my favorite pieces from that series is called Too Blue to Be True, because it's like really that like turquoise color. And if you've ever been like to, the beaches in Destin or like down in the Virgin Islands, like you see that water and you're like, that's not a real color, So the reason I titled the series State of Mind is because people say, oh, I need to relax. I want to go to the beach, Well, how can we cultivate that state of mind even just in our day-to-day? Because life is not the highlight reel. Life is like grinding the coffee beans, making the coffee, trudging to work, doing tasks that you don't want to do, sitting on the phone for admin work. Like that's what most of life is. And so how can we cultivate that kind of vacation freeing state of mind? Like, every day as an act of mindfulness, basically.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Do you feel like when you're working on a canvas, that's like a vacation, or do you almost like transcend?
I'm not here.
Yeah.
That's
such an interesting feeling, right?
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure you've experienced this too when you're entering. I think a lot of people call it flow.
Yeah.
But I kind of think it's like a channeling. Like we are creative beings. That's something that's really unique about humans is that we create things that are new and put it out there. And a lot of musical artists will say like, I don't know where this song came from. It just came to me, right. And I feel the same way about art. It's like, I don't know where this composition came from. It just came to me. Yeah. So sometimes my wife will walk into the room and she'll be like, hey, okay, never mind. Because she can see, she says there's like an energy that surrounds me. And she's just like, that person's not touchable right now. I have to just let her finish whatever she's doing.
When you get into that flow state, and this is kind of a left field question, do you feel like you've connected more to something like deep internally, or you've connected to something externally and higher, if that makes sense?
That's a great question, because I think a lot of people, when they feel that, that's what they call God. That feeling of like deep belief and passion and like love for themselves and the world. A lot of people, that is like what they get from religion. It's not really that for me. I'm not really a religious person in that way. I was raised in the Catholic Church. I was raised like very piously and like straight road. And so I think when I was a child, when I would get into that state, I did identify that with the higher power, at the time, the words that were given to me, which was like, oh, this is God or Jesus, the Holy Spirit in me. Yeah. But now I really see it as like, there's this just river of humanity and of interconnectedness that's running amongst all of us. And when I get into that flow state, I feel like I've just tapped into that waterway. And it's cool because I'm like, other people are experiencing this with me right now. And like whatever we're creating right now is unique to this moment. Yeah. And just feeling so small in that is very humbling. And realizing that, we're not, like the ego that lives in all of us, it really erases when I get into that space. I feel very humbled by it.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's such a sound bite, like I attributed to the words that I was given, because we can all attribute it to different words and phrasing, but I guarantee we'll describe that feeling the same way. That's awesome.
And you'll get new words to describe, because we're limited by what we can say verbally, but we're not limited by what we can say through art. Yeah. Although what you see when you look at my art is going to be different than what I see, but that's not the point is not for me to tell you what to feel, but just to offer you a visual that maybe lets you feel something.
Yeah. How does that make you feel, knowing that someone else can look at your art and their interpretation can be drastically different from your intention? I know a lot of artists have maybe like qualms with that, or like control issues over like, this is what I meant and I need to make sure that everybody that sees it knows what I meant.
Well, it just happened at the Olympics, right? Yeah. I think for me, like, I've really let that go. I'm not trying to control what people think. And, as a queer artist too, like, people like are gonna judge me no matter what. If they don't even like who, you know, they can't even like who I am and like who my family is. It's like, psh. Right. But I think the people who, what matters to me is that the people who know and love me, that they had the opportunity to see my art and that I can get their feedback. That's really who I listen to. Mm-hmm. So I'll send my pieces to like my brother. He's like a great art critic for me, you know, and he'll say, this isn't quite your best work. I think you need to add something here or there. He's not a visual artist at all, but he just is someone I trust. My wife's the same way. I'll say, what do you think about this piece? And pretty much what anyone else thinks outside of a couple other people, I'm like, whatever, because it's not for them. It's really for me. Yeah, for sure. I keep touching this. It's really for me. So, yeah, I think a lot of artists do struggle with that though, because we want to be seen. But every famous artist ever, you know, they're rarely interpreted how they wanted to be interpreted. And especially once you died, don't mean to be morbid, but there are people who got no fame or recognition in their lifetime. And it's only after they passed on. Like I think of my favorite photographer, Vivian Maier. Like she was a nanny who would walk around New York City and take photos, and she never even developed her film. And it wasn't until after she died and somebody was gonna literally throw them away, and they're like, actually, let me just develop some of these. And then this whole inner creative world of hers like came out. We have no idea what she was thinking or meaning, you know? So we just can't control that. I think the purpose has to be to get it out there and put yourself out there, because that's all you can do.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. How do you, I guess, rate the opinions of someone who, for lack of better words, isn't qualified to critique your art versus someone who may have a little bit more accolade or a more scholarly opinion?
Well, some of my art is kind of provocative. So I did a whole series that was like very feminine, and some people were really offended by it because of their interpretation of the piece. But I think of like a Georgia O'Keeffe, like Floral, you know, her pieces are controversial too, because people say, oh, she's painting, you know, these vulgar body parts. It's like, she's painting what's inside of her, you know? And so if you're offended by it or you don't like it, swipe, you know, or unfollow. It's not for you. But there's a whole, just being open to that, there's a whole other group of people who are inspired and motivated and like healed by the same piece. So it's not going to be for everyone. I don't think you can make art that soothes everyone. And so I don't really try to.
If everybody likes it, not enough people have seen it.
I mean, there are people who like think the Beatles were trash, and then there are people who like think the Beatles were God. It's like people who love Taylor Swift and people who think her music is crap. You know, these are some of the most famous, like, you know, artists of all time. So it would be crazy for me to think that I could do something, you know, different than they are.
I was watching a movie last night, and it was this younger guy hanging out with this older guy. I'm not going to go into the narrative, but he was going into an interview, and he was pumping them up by making them listen to Eye of the Tiger. And the old guy's like, yo, I remember when this song was just bad. And I was like, yo, that's such an interesting dynamic, because it's like, I only view it for what it is now, and once upon a time, it was bad. It wasn't great. And now I'm getting to like the age now where it's like, ooh, I remember when that came out, and nobody liked that. And now that thing has influenced or repositioned the narrative for the direction that we're in now. Like T-Pain, for example, or when Yeezus came out, everybody's like, what are all these industrial robot sounds? This is weird. But now there's distortion and vocals and 808s and all of that. So I think the same thing exists in art and plenty of different examples.
And it evolves over time what people think quality art is. Like with acrylic paint, because you asked me earlier like about getting into that medium, you know, it used to be if you weren't using oil, it wasn't fine art. Right? And in the last 20, 30 years, we've accepted that this is also a beautiful form of fine art. But we didn't even have plastics 100 years ago. It didn't even exist. So what's the next medium going to be, you know? And I think I keep coming back to like all of us have this like artist inside of us, but I want to talk a little bit about like a particular piece of mine that really solidified that for me, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so there's a piece that I painted, and it's kind of evokes like the wings of a butterfly, like just the patterns in it and the colors, like that oranges and blacks and whites. And when I was painting it, I wasn't thinking about monarchs at all. I was just, I don't know, I just kind of felt like I wanted to use these colors. And then that day, like after I finished most of that painting, it was drying on the floor. I look out my window, this is in New Orleans, and we had a fence that separated like our side of the house to the next one. I see lined on the fence monarch chrysalises, like 20 of them.
That's crazy.
And you know how they're that like bright jade color?
Yeah.
So they're like, my stomach's rumbling. So they're like unmistakable. And I was like, this is crazy.
Right.
Because like I didn't see them there. But I don't know. This is where it gets a little woo-woo, but I feel like something in me knew they were there.
Yeah.
And then I painted this piece that was them. Then I got the joy of like watching them each emerge as I finished this piece.
That's beautiful.
And so it's like, what is art? Like art is, you're expressing something that's external, but it also then becomes internal, and there's a symbiotic relationship between what you put out there and what you get back. And I do think that the more you make art, the more beauty you see in the world.
Yeah.
And the more beauty you can see in everyday life, that makes your quality of life better.
Yeah.
And that makes you feel happiness and joy and like purpose.
All right. And you perceive so many things throughout the day. It's just a matter of if it's subconscious or conscious. And I think the more aware and in the moment you are, then it starts to kind of become more in the forefront. So I think Monarch is a really good example of that.
Yeah, it like somehow becomes you in some way. Yeah. Well, monarchs are like, then I got obsessed with monarchs because this is my personality. I like, you know, I get obsessed with things and then I dive deep into it. So then I was like, what is going on with monarchs? Why do I need to know everything about them? And so I learned that, and maybe some of y'all already know this, but it takes like 4 or 5 generations, like within a calendar year. Like monarchs, most of them only live like a couple months. And then there's this like super generation that is the one that actually crosses the Rio Grande or like comes all the way down through Mexico to go to this one forest where they all winter. So all the monarchs in all of North America are going to the same forest to like make the next generation, but only one generation of them within a calendar year will make that journey. So, you know, there's the first generation comes a little bit down, then the next one, then the next one, then the next one. And then for whatever reason, this next one is the one that's gonna, you know, they're not gonna live for just 3 months and they're not gonna just fly a couple states. They're gonna live for like 6 months and they're gonna fly all the way across the entire ocean. And so you think about that monarch that lived in that first generation, you know, that capability was in them to cross the Rio, but it just wasn't their time. They were, right? And so you think about that with yourself and generations of your family that came before you, you know, you have a potential in you that you can't even comprehend because your life is small and you're like, I'm just supposed to go here, right? And it's like, no, you could fly across like the whole continent. That's in you, but you have to believe that it's there to achieve it. That like really really inspired me. I was like, okay, I'm really identifying with that. Like I want to be the super generation. Like I want to put myself out there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Do you feel like a sense of maybe, I don't know, like guilt or betrayal in the fact that, you know, you could have been the acrylic and watercolor of clarinet and the acrylic and watercolor of acting or all these other things that you explored. So one, what made you kind of decide, this expression is the one for me? And then how do you feel about some of the other things that you probably could have been just as good at, because you really hone in whenever you want to learn something?
Yeah, okay, it's interesting you say, do you feel guilt? I mean, yeah, it's like with the clarinet, for example, I was like classically trained clarinetist. I was, you know, I played all the way through college in like, you know, really high a really, 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 like the highest level that you can play, that was my craft at the time. If I picked the clarinet up right now, it would take me probably 2 weeks to even remember what the scales are, right? Because that's how our brains and bodies are. Like you start to lose that mind-body connection when you step away from an art, but I would be able to get back there because I developed it at one point.
Right.
So I know that I can have it again when I want it again. So I don't really feel guilt around it. It actually kind of is exciting for me because I'm like, right now, the clarinet is not really an option for me because it's really loud. My kids can break it. And I don't have the time to dedicate to like a symphony band, which is what I would really need to fully express that.
Right.
So it's just not the medium for me right now. But I'm still, like, even just you ask me that, I'm still excited knowing that, like, when I'm 40, I will.
Yeah.
You know, I'll pick it back up again. Which when I'm 40 in like a couple years. But yeah, so it's not really guilt. It's like kind of exciting to know that you grew that talent. And my kid who's almost 5, you know, he's starting to want to try things. And it's nothing for him to be like, yeah, I want to try karate. I'm like, all right, let's go. He's like, oh, I want to do soccer shots. Okay, let's go. And then he'll kind of report back, I don't think I want to do this one. Or like, I want to learn to swim. So that's what we did this summer. It's like, take swim lessons. And he's like, yeah, I want to keep doing that. I want to do more of that. And so he is very open to being in newness. And knowing that he doesn't know anything about something, and he could admit that and not feel any sort of way. When we grow into adults, something happens and that goes away. And it's like, oh, no, I'm not an artist, or like, oh no, I don't sing, or I don't play an instrument. I don't, you know, pick up a new sport. It's like, well, why not? You did it as a kid, you know, it's about wanting to do it. You know, no, you're not going to go to the Olympics starting at 40, you know, learning track and field. But if you feel inspired to learn track and field, like, why not?
Right. And that brings up something that you kind of mentioned, or we talked about earlier, and that sometimes it's not the fact that you picked it up and you were good at it immediately or had like a natural talent and that's what kind of propelled you forward. That is the case sometimes. But other times it's the fact that you weren't good at it and it still enticed you. There was a little piece, or maybe you did it the 3rd time and it was awesome, but you don't understand how the fuck you made it, so you had to do it again to try to recreate it. So yeah, I think whatever that thing is that entices you enough is when you decide that's my thing. And like, art in this form is just what's working for me in this current stage of life. It's like a medium that I can pull off right now. Having little kids, like not having a dedicated studio space outside of my home. We don't have a dining room because I was like, that's my studio now. But you know, it's still in my house. I'm still limited by what I can make in there. But it will change again. And it's actually I'm learning a new medium right now. So I just started learning piano. Ooh, nice.
Yeah, I got this idea in my head, and this is what I'm talking about when people get inspiration, like you kind of got to go for it because that's the window open and you got to, before it closes again. So I got this idea that I wanted to write a song for my wife for her birthday. And I was like, it's going to need an instrument, and I can't sing and play clarinet at the same time. So it's going to have to be, you know, guitar or piano, I had decided. And my son had been taking piano lessons, only like 4 or 5 weeks he'd been going. And then at that same week that I decided I wanted to learn piano, he decided piano wasn't for him right now. He said, maybe we'll try it when I'm 6. I'm like, okay. So when we went to his class that week, just I showed up with the teacher. He's like, where's Sam? I was like, oh no, you're teaching me now. And he was like, oh, are you serious? He's like, you want to learn piano? I was like, yeah, let's go. So he showed me some chords, and then that week I wrote the song just using those chords. I don't know anything else about piano. You know, I'm a trained musician. I can pick out, you know, I have like the sound, you know, connection to like knowing where scales work and that kind of stuff. But, and so I posted on Instagram, I was like, oh, I'm learning piano to write a song for, you know, my wife. And a lot of my close friends were like, Carol, what the hell? You're learning something else? And I'm like, yeah, and why aren't you? You know, why not? And so I've actually written like 5 songs in the last month now, because as I've told you, I get into a new medium and I kind of want to explore it more. So now I'm like, oh, let me figure out how to like, you know, record these, and let me figure out how to like get a backbeat in here. And like now I have this whole other space that's opened up, and I'm not good at it. I don't know what I'm doing. but it's cool. It's exciting. And I don't mind being bad at stuff. And I think it's kind of radical to have the audacity to be like, yeah, I'm learning this new thing, and I'm like not great at it at all.
Yeah, that's almost like empowering, you know? And for the silent people that would never admit that, it's empowering for them too, you know? To not be good at something. That would be such a badass installation. To have your pieces and, you know, your album, your EP.
Have my album and my pieces, and then I'll like play clarinet in the corner.
That's dope. How do you feel about the term and the culture surrounding fine art and things being highbrow versus midbrow and lowbrow?
I don't know anything about that world. I mean, people will assume that I've applied to galleries and stuff just because my art does look like it would be in those spaces, and I think that it could, but I haven't put any energy towards that because it's so selective. Yeah. And sometimes I look at what's in a gallery and I'm like, I'm not into that. So I don't really want to be trying to get into a gallery just to say I'm in a gallery when my art has the same value whether other people put it in their gallery or not. Yeah. Like I know that it's good. So if people want to buy it, you know, and have it in their home, that's what's meaningful to me. Yeah. If it's showing in a gallery, you know, I think eventually I will move further towards that, and then maybe people will consider it fine art. But the truth of it is, it was always the same art. Yeah. It's the same piece, you know, when it wasn't in a gallery. For sure. So it's just about what people, that goes back to if people think, you know, you're good or not, or like your art or not. It's like, that's not motivating for me. Yeah. And if it was, I would be a very fragile artist because I would be constantly waiting for people to validate me. And that would stall me from making more. Oh, I'm not getting enough positivity back, so I don't know if I should make more. Right. It's like, no, do it. Like, get more out there.
Yeah, and that's such a healthy perspective to have because I know a lot of people struggle with that because in the creative space, especially when you're talking about like sustainability and trying to live off of it, you can't denounce the external validation because that may be what pays your bills, you know what I mean, or gets you to those heights and whatnot. But to have a healthy enough relationship to remember why you did it, and it's always internal first, and then the external will hopefully come.
Yeah, I mean, that's why I haven't ever tried to really do art full-time without anything else to bring in money. So I've always had at least part-time work behind me that I'm doing. And I was a teacher for a decade in classrooms, and then I started doing more coaching and consulting work. So that's kind of what I do to actually have a stable income. Yeah. And that is actually very freeing for me in my art. Knowing that okay, if I need to pick up another contract to get me through the next 3 months, I know that I can do that. These past 3 months and the next 3, I really said I'm dedicating it to my art, and I transitioned from a job that I had and kind of put that on the back burner, and I have been focusing exclusively on my art, and it has really made it harder to be really free in it because I'm constantly thinking about the dollar amount. Okay, so but knowing that I have like another contract coming up, it's like, okay, it's gonna be okay. Like I really need that right now in my art career. I need to know that I'm, especially having little kids, you know, that I'm taking care of like our financial needs. And I think a lot of artists feel like they've made it once they quit their day job. And that's not really where I'm at right now.
Yeah, because now you're, somebody put it like this, which I thought was interesting. It's like when you can go from working for someone to being an entrepreneur and working for everybody.
Working for everyone.
It's like, you want to work for one person or do you want to work for everybody?
That is so, that's so real. I feel that deeply.
You know, because you always think like I'm working for myself. And there's validity to each statement, but it's like, when you think about it that way, it's a real good kind of way to think about. Do you want to be like full-time, or, you know, it's cool to have this thing that's a 9-to-5 or another hustle that serves the people, and this one can serve self, you know? Yeah, I think that's a healthy relationship to have, and some people try to do the fully serving self in a space that needs to serve other people in order to be sustainable.
Yep.
Yeah, it's wild.
I was watching an interview of Chapel Rowan, and like obviously she's blowing up right now, like in the music pop world. And she was saying, she's like, I've actually been doing this for 10 years. And she even had been signed to a label like 10 years ago. Yeah. But she's like, I only started making money this year. And that's crazy, right? So I think if that's where you're getting your satisfaction from, if that's how you're judging yourself as being successful, then you're going to feel really badly for a long time. And you still might never make it, you know? So I just that can't be where I'm getting my motivation from, because otherwise, I'm not going to have any.
Yeah, and then the process is going to be miserable. You probably won't find yourself in that flow state and connected as much.
Right.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit more about your brother.
Yeah.
Because he seems like he can put on multiple hats when it comes to providing criticism and feedback. Yeah,
so I have a brother who's just 1 year older than me, so we kind of grew up like, in the same river. Like we were just like, always on top of each other. And then we have a younger sister who's 3 years younger than me. Okay. And the three of us like have a text chain that's just constantly going. And so we'll share with each other like other little things we're doing like outside of our work, because that's really what sustains us. So like my brother's learning the ukulele right now. And my sister just switched careers, so she's learning like new things about that like art form. And then of course I've got my art and now piano and stuff. And I really like respect their opinions about like, if they can see me in the art that I'm making, and they offer me like, I can trust their opinion. If they're like, I don't like this one as much, I'm like, okay, that probably means it's not conveying like what I typically convey in a piece. Not necessarily that they don't like it, but it's like, I'm not getting something from this, and I can trust what they say, versus like you put a piece on Instagram, for example, just depending on the timing of when you posted it and the colors in it, it might get 10 likes or it might get 1,000 likes. And that's not really indicative of if the piece is going to sell or not. Yeah. Because you just need one person to want it in their house. Right. So I think I lean on them a lot for like encouragement and to keep going forward. And then I have a group of like 3 or 4 friends that have kind of been like lifelong friends that I'll send stuff to and get feedback from, or they'll ask me like, oh, what are you making? What kind of art are you making recently? Because I think a lot of times we ask people, oh, how are you doing? And then they start talking about their job and their family, which are important. They're very important, but that's not the end all. And so I appreciate when people ask me like, oh, what kind of art are you making? Like that really, like, that's really healing to be like, oh, you really want to know like what's in my soul, because what art I'm working on or what creation I'm doing, like that is what I want to talk about. I don't want to tell you about my boring like email that I sent and the drama at work or whatever, or just the difficulties of like family life and stuff. Like I want to talk to you about what I'm expressing that has everything to do with that, right? But it's uniquely mine. So
I mean, you'll probably naturally start talking about the other stuff,
right.
You know what I mean? Because it's all encompassing. How involved are your kids or your wife in your art?
So my kids, like they love to paint too, because they see me doing it. And when I paint on the floor.
Yeah, because you have huge canvas.
Yeah, I have huge canvases and I need it to be level. Okay, my house is not actually level. I've learned it like tilts to one side. So a lot of my pieces right now like move in that direction, but I can balance it up by like propping things underneath it. Right. Yeah, so they're pretty involved because it's like in the dining room. Well, we don't really have a dining room. The dining room is my studio. It's probably like 12 by 10 maybe. And so there's always something drying on the floor. Right. And especially my little one, like sometimes she'll run in the room and she'll run right over the top of it. And like, so some of my pieces actually have like her footprints like behind it. I've had to cover it up. Yeah. But sometimes I'll make a piece with them, or I'll ask like Sam, he's like old enough now, I'll say like, okay, I'm gonna put green next, and like, where do you think it should go? And there's one piece that we worked on together, and it actually is really cool. Like he put a lot of like big scribbles on it and stuff, which like I probably wouldn't have done, but it does look good in the piece. And like he's uninhibited, right? So he's like, it definitely needs to go here. And then before I can, he's just, But there's one piece that I made recently. I said 30 by 40 is my favorite size, but recently I've been painting 70 by 36. I don't know why. I had stretcher bars in that size and I just kept going with it. Mm-hmm. And so I had this huge piece and like, it needed something to define movement on it. Like it had a nice color movement, but I was like, I need like a line. Yeah. And it needs to be like yellow. And so I was getting Sam ready for bed. My baby was already asleep. And I was like, hey, Sam, before we go upstairs, I need to add this yellow line. Like it just, channels down to me. I'm like, go add the yellow line, And he was like, no, don't do it. Like he didn't think I was gonna look at it and I was like, I'm doing it. And so I like get down on the floor and I get this like acrylic pen and I'm going this long line. It's 70 inches long, it's more than that. It's going from one corner and he's going, oh my gosh, stop, it's not right. He was literally like, stop doing the yellow. And like he didn't think it was gonna look good. And then as soon as I got it to the final corner, I said, no, step back and look at it. And so he steps back and he goes, oh yeah, it does look good. And it's funny because like I'll say that to him too when he's painting. I'll be like, oh, I don't know if it should. And then he's like, psh. And I kind of see like us mirroring each other in that way. And I think it's cool to like show your kids like, no, I'm gonna try this. Like it might look bad. And then if it does, I'll paint over it. Yeah. And it's the same thing in life. Like I'm gonna take this action and if it's wrong, I can apologize or backtrack or try again or redo. Nothing has to be permanent.
Right, lead them by example.
Yeah.
I hope they implement that as well.
So they're involved. They're involved.
That's awesome. I just pictured that whole, like, almost like a movie scene.
Yeah, he was like, don't
pure
do
chaos. It's like, no, that's great, actually. What would you say to someone, because there's a lot of it's expression and it makes you feel good regardless of what the medium is, but there's a correspondence to that because you get so much joy and fulfillment from it. And we're in a world where everything can't be joy and fulfillment. There's also the opposite of that when you're trying to do the things that
you want to
give you joy and fulfillment. So what would you say for a younger artist, someone that's even older, just a new artist, regardless of age, that's pursuing something to stay motivated in that expression and the joyfulness, knowing that they might get some sadness and melancholy from the world that we live in?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I probably won't answer it like as complexly as I want to, because it's hard to I know how I feel about that, but it's hard to externalize it. I think for me, my wife knows that I have these creative passions. And so she's very supportive of them. I think I mentioned earlier in the interview, she'll kind of be like, oh, you're in your zone. I'm going to just, and she's always very motivated by seeing me be fulfilled by that. So I think having, your closest family, be supportive of you is really critical, especially when, we're tag teaming our little kids. And she's a professor at the law school. So she's got her own creative process that she's doing, writing and teaching and we're actually mirroring each other's creative processes just with very different mediums, the most different mediums. And yesterday I was playing another song I wrote and I was playing it for her and she was talking about this paper, how she was getting this breakthrough on this paper, and I'm talking about how I'm getting this breakthrough on this song. And having people you can talk to about your processes like that, I think can help you realize you're not alone in your art and that we all have these internal creative processes we go through and we all doubt ourselves and then have breakthroughs and doubt ourselves and have breakthroughs. And it's really good to be reminded of that. And she helps keep me grounded in no, you do need to make art this week. What are you gonna do? And we've been together for a long time. We met when we were 21 and 22. Nice. So we were babies, and now I'm 36 and we've really seen a lot of versions of each other over the years. And when I first met her, she didn't even want to go to law school and now she's a law professor. So we've really watched each other evolve. I wasn't painting with acrylic. I wasn't painting when I met her, So it's interesting to watch people evolve. Yeah. And I had a friend, I want to tell this story because I think it kind of is the reason that I do really believe that we're all artists and that we should identify as that if we have mediums that we express. So I had this friend named Samir, And I was learning something new. I was in a learn to row program, like 8-person rowing.
Okay.
This was in DC on the Anacostia River. We would get sick from the water because it was so contaminated. It is the craziest thing I've ever done, I think, truly, rowing on that river. But anyways, we were in this program, and so I would sit by him in the boat. It was co-ed. It was like community rowing, right? And so we're rowing, and you're not supposed to be talking, but like, you know, we're talking. And he's always talking about his art that he's making, like this dance he's doing, or this like DJing he's doing, or this like piece he's painting. And I'm like, this is the coolest person I've ever met. Like, yeah, we're like, they're like, be quiet. And we're like, oh, sorry. We're like, really? And so then and we did this program for, I think it was like 3 months. And it wasn't until the program was over, and we were meeting like 4 times a week. It was like an intense thing. At the end of those 3 months, I learned that he was this like boss at the Smithsonian, like one of the Smithsonian museums. Wow. He was like a top like art person. Yeah. But he was working like it wasn't his art, you know, he was running the business of it. And I was like, I'm sorry, you are like a businessman? Yeah. I thought you were an artist. Yeah. And he was like, what are you talking about? I am an artist. I'm not my job. Right. That's the most boring thing about me. But in DC, that's really radical. Yeah. Because in DC, everybody's climbing their corporate ladders and climbing their government ladders and trying to get to the next rank. And that is, you know, how people identify you as like, oh, they're this or they're that. And he's just had totally rejected that and was like, no, I'm an artist. And this is, you know, what I do is not who I am. What I make is who I am. Yeah. And I was like, oh shit, I'm an artist too. You know, at the time I was doing a lot of teaching and consulting work, and I had been identifying with that. And then I realized that's not who I am. And so that was really like a pivotal moment forward for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting that really honing in on who you are as an artist aids some of those other things, because he probably wouldn't have gotten to the level that he was in his business career had he not adopted, you know, his full higher self. Yeah, that's so cool. Shout outs to him. How did the rowing?
I mean, I did it for 3 months and then I never did it again, so it wasn't really for me. I'm kind of short, so I don't know. I would like push the, I don't remember what the words are called now, the pedals back, and like my feet would like fly off because I was so short. So it certainly wasn't for me, but it was fun to do something new.
When's the last time you talked to that guy?
Samir, we talk all the time. Okay, cool. Yeah. He's kind of one of those friends where we'll connect for like 3 or 4 hours on the phone, like every couple of months, and just pick right back up, like where we left off. That's awesome. And he's continued to have new paths and like art forms and like entire lives like lived and like started over again. So he's continually still an inspiration for me about like growth and continue to challenge yourself as a person, like have the audacity to be like, I'm trying this and I'm going all in on it and I'm not good at it right now, but maybe I will be, and it will deepen who I am as a person.
So naturally, in closing, what's the next steps for you?
I think just growing the business and starting to put myself out there more in physical spaces is kind of where I want to grow next. Like you said, you know, art is very interactive, and a lot of people need to see it to recognize if they identify with it or not. So I think that's where I'll push forward next, and expanding my print business to make art more affordable too. Especially with like those really big pieces, you can get them printed on canvas and they look, you know, like they're hand painted, but you can offer them at like 1/3 the price. And so a lot of people will message me, I really love your art, but I can't, you know, pay at that price point. And so this is, you know, also accessibility to art, I think is like a cool thing to work towards too.
Awesome. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to
Thanks so much. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it's been awesome just learning about the person behind the art.
Exactly.
And, yeah, it's been a pleasure.